Dad perfect events. That Tuesday afternoon, when my 7-year-old granddaughter Nancy grabbed my sleeve and whispered, "Grandpa, please stop sending him money," I knew something was terribly wrong. I'm Harold Mitchell, 58 years old, retired mechanical engineer. For the past 5 years, every January, I've been sending my son-in-law, Richard, $25,000, money I earned through 30 years of designing automotive systems at Ford's Dearborn plant and careful retirement planning. I did it for Nancy, for my late wife Margaret, and for my daughter Dorothy, who I thought I'd buried 5 years ago. But Nancy's words that day changed everything. The fear in her eyes wasn't normal for a child. She kept looking over her shoulder at the playground, then back at me with those wide, worried eyes that reminded me so much of Dorothy at that age. "Grandpa, please stop sending money. There's something you need to see." "What do you mean, sweetheart?" "Just watch Daddy. You'll see." I'd been an engineer my whole life, trained to spot problems, analyze data, find solutions. When a transmission system failed, I could trace it back to the source. When production lines broke down, I could identify the weak point. But grief had clouded my judgment for 5 years. Maybe it was time to start thinking like an engineer again. Let me back up. Dorothy died in March 2020, or so I believed. Car accident on Route 15, vehicle went off the road, caught fire. They said the body was too badly burned for an open casket. Richard identified her from dental records. We cremated what was left. Margaret took it hard, really hard. Our only child, gone at 27. Margaret had always been the emotional one in our marriage. I was the practical engineer. She was the heart of our family. When Dorothy died, something broke inside Margaret that I couldn't fix. I tried everything: grief counseling, antidepressants, trips to visit her sister in Florida. Nothing worked. Margaret just faded away, day by day, like a machine slowly losing power. 6 months after we buried Dorothy, I found Margaret collapsed in our kitchen by the coffee maker. The same coffee maker Dorothy had bought us for Christmas 3 years earlier, still sitting there like a monument to better times. Heart attack, the doctors said. But I knew better. She died of a broken heart. Losing Dorothy killed something in Margaret. Losing Margaret finished breaking what was left of me. So it was just me, Nancy, and Richard, a 53-year-old widower trying to help his son-in-law raise a 2-year-old. Richard worked construction management, said money was tight with a toddler to raise alone. I had my Ford pension, some savings, Dorothy's life insurance that we'd left untouched. Margaret would have wanted me to help. Every January, like clockwork. $25,000 wired to Richard Coleman's account. Family support, I wrote in the memo line. Over 5 years, that's $125,000. Most of my retirement savings, but I figured Nancy needed stability, education funds, a future that Dorothy would never see. Richard. Never said much about the money. Quick text messages. Got it, thanks. Sometimes just received. No reports on how it was spent, no updates on Nancy's needs, no pictures of her growing up. I told myself he was just private, that grief affected people differently. Some people withdraw when they're hurting. But after Nancy's warning at the park, I started paying attention, really paying attention, the way I used to analyze production problems at the plant. The next Saturday when I picked up Nancy for our usual ice cream trip, I watched Richard differently. He barely looked at Nancy when she ran to the car. No hug goodbye, no reminder about being good for Grandpa, no love you like most fathers would say. Just stood on the porch with his phone, already dialing someone before we'd pulled out of the driveway. At the ice cream shop, Nancy ordered her usual strawberry swirl. I got chocolate chip, same as always. But something felt different. She was quieter than normal, kept glancing around, like someone might be listening. "Nancy, what did you mean about watching Daddy?" She stirred her ice cream with her plastic spoon, didn't look up. "He talks to a lady sometimes. At the house. When I'm supposed to be sleeping." "What lady?" "I don't know her name. She has dark hair. She comes over and they talk in the kitchen. Sometimes she stays really late." Dark hair. Richard had never mentioned dating anyone in the 5 years since Dorothy died. Never introduced Nancy to anyone. For 5 years, I'd assumed he was focused on being a single father, honoring Dorothy's memory. How often does this lady come over? Nancy thought for a moment. Maybe 3 times a week? Sometimes more. 3 times a week for how long? And why hadn't Richard mentioned her? If he was dating someone seriously enough that she was around Nancy regularly, wouldn't he have introduced her to me? Especially since I was sending $25,000 a year to help support the household? That night, I did what any engineer would do. I started gathering data. I pulled out my laptop and reviewed 5 years of bank transfers. $25,000 every January, $125,000 total. I looked for patterns, inconsistencies, anything that didn't add up. What I found was nothing. No thank you notes beyond those brief texts. No receipts, no explanations of expenses, no photos of Nancy's school events, no reports about her progress, no evidence the money was being used for her benefit. For an engineer used to detailed documentation and accountability, this felt wrong, very wrong. I called my old friend Theodore Barnes the next morning. Ted had retired from private investigation work about the same time I left Ford. We'd known each other 25 years, played poker every other Thursday at the VFW Hall. Ted understood the value of methodical investigation, same as I understood the importance of systematic problem solving. Ted, I need a favor. Something's not right with my son-in-law. What kind of not right? I told him about Nancy's warning, about the mystery woman, about $125,000 with no accountability. Ted listened without interrupting. Good investigators do that, same way good engineers listen to machine diagnostics before jumping to conclusions. Harold, you want to know where your money went? I want to know if Nancy's safe. The money's secondary, but it's connected somehow. Money usually tells the story. Let's follow it. Ted came over that evening with equipment that reminded me of the diagnostic tools we used at Ford. GPS tracker smaller than a matchbox, digital camera with telephoto lens, recording devices. Professional grade stuff. We start simple, Ted said, spreading the gear on my kitchen table. Watch Richard's routine, document patterns, see who comes and goes, build the evidence methodically. The next afternoon, we parked Ted's gray sedan down the street from Richard's house. Far enough not to draw attention, close enough to see clearly. At 2:30, a silver Honda pulled into the driveway. Through the telephoto lens, I watched a woman get out. Mid-30s, dark hair pulled back in a ponytail. Moved like she belonged there. She had a key to the front door. That's not normal, Ted said, snapping photos with timestamps. Man hasn't mentioned a girlfriend in 5 years, but she's got a key. The woman stayed exactly 2 hours and 15 minutes. When she left, Richard walked her to the car. I watched through binoculars as he put his hand on her waist, kissed her cheek. Casual familiarity. The kind of comfort that develops over time. Harold, your son-in-law has been lying to you. We followed the pattern for a week. The woman came Tuesday, Thursday, and Saturday. Always the same time, always the same comfortable routine. I ran her license plate through Ted's contacts. Barbara Reynolds, 33, worked at First National Bank downtown. Bank employee, access to financial information, possible inside knowledge of my monthly transfers to Richard. During our surveillance, I noticed other things. Richard's truck was newer than it should be for someone struggling financially. The house had fresh paint, new gutters, professional landscaping. Nancy wore expensive clothes, carried a designer backpack to school. These weren't the purchases of a struggling single father. These looked like the lifestyle of someone with steady income. My steady income. Ted, I need to see where Dorothy's buried. Harold, what are you thinking? I'm thinking like an engineer. When something doesn't add up, you check your baseline assumptions. We drove to Riverside Cemetery the next morning. Dorothy's grave was in Section C, row 12, right next to Margaret's. Simple granite headstones, both paid for with my Ford life insurance. I stood between the two graves, looking at the dates carved in stone. Something bothered me about Dorothy's headstone, but I couldn't place what. Then it hit me like a failed transmission dropping out of gear. The dates were wrong. Dorothy died March 15th, 2020, but the headstone showed March 12th, 2020. 3 days earlier. Ted, look at this. He crouched down, examined the engraving carefully. Could be a mistake. Happens sometimes with memorial orders, especially during emotional times. I'm an engineer, Ted. I don't believe in mistakes like this. 3 days isn't a typo. 3 days is data. That weekend, I made a decision that would have made Margaret proud. I drove to Dorothy's old apartment building, the same place she'd lived before the accident. Mrs. Henderson, the building manager, had known Dorothy since she moved in after college. Mr. Mitchell? I haven't seen you since the funeral. How are you holding up? I'm doing okay, Mrs. Henderson. Can I ask you something about that night Dorothy left? Her expression changed. Which night? The night she died. March 15th. Mrs. Henderson frowned, looked confused. Mr. Mitchell, Dorothy left on March 12th. I remember because I was collecting rent that week. She came down with a suitcase, looked upset. I asked if everything was okay, and she said she had. To go away for a while. March 12th. 3 days before the supposed accident. The same date on the headstone. Mrs. Henderson, did you see her car that night? No, someone else picked her up. A woman with dark hair driving a silver car. Honda, I think. Barbara Reynolds. Silver Honda. Dark hair. My engineering mind started connecting the data points. Wrong date on headstone. Witness seeing Dorothy leave alive 3 days before supposed death. Mystery woman picking her up. Same mystery woman now dating Richard. I drove straight to Ted's house, found him in his garage working on a fishing rod. My hands were shaking as I walked up his driveway. Ted, Dorothy didn't die in that car accident. He set down the rod, studied my face. Harold, that's a serious accusation. The dates don't match. The building manager saw her leave alive 3 days before the supposed accident. A woman with dark hair picked her up in a silver Honda. Sound familiar? Ted was quiet for a long time, the way he got when processing complex information. What do you want to do? I want to find my daughter, and if she's alive, then someone's been playing a very expensive game with my grief, and I want to know why. The next phase of our investigation focused on Richard's daily routine. As an engineer, I approached it like debugging a complex system: data collection, pattern analysis, logical conclusions. Richard left home every morning at 7:45 sharp, drove to various construction sites around the county, managing projects, meeting with subcontractors, normal work routine. But twice a week, Tuesday and Thursday, he made an additional stop that didn't fit the pattern. Industrial District, east side of town. Building 447, a warehouse complex that had seen better days. Empty loading docks, broken windows, the kind of place businesses went to die. What's he doing there? I asked Ted through the binoculars. Only one way to find out. We followed him the next Tuesday morning. Richard parked near a side entrance, looked around carefully, then went inside. He stayed exactly 45 minutes. When he came out, he checked his surroundings again before getting back in his truck. Ted and I waited until Richard left, then approached the building. The side entrance was locked, but Ted had skills from his investigation days that came in handy. Technically, we're trespassing, he said, working the lock. Technically, someone's been stealing my retirement money for 5 years. Inside, the warehouse was mostly empty. Industrial shelving, some old equipment, concrete floors that echoed our footsteps. But in the back corner, someone had tried to make a home. A bed with faded blankets, a small refrigerator humming in the corner, a card table with a hot plate, instant coffee, plastic utensils, clothes hanging on a wire line strung between 2 posts, and on the makeshift wall above the bed, photos of Nancy, school pictures, birthday photos, candid shots of her playing in the park. Every image I'd sent Richard over the years, taped to that concrete wall like a shrine. Sitting on the bed, staring at those pictures, was my daughter Dorothy. 5 years older, thinner than I remembered, with dark circles under her eyes. Her hair was longer, darker, pulled back in a messy ponytail. But it was definitely Dorothy. Dad? She looked terrified, shocked, like seeing a ghost walk through her door. Dorothy, what the hell is going on here? She started crying immediately. Deep, painful sobs that reminded me of Margaret in those last months. Dad, I can explain. It's not what you think. Explain what? Explain how you've been living in a warehouse for 5 years while I thought you were dead? Explain how Richard took $125,000 from me while you were locked up in here like some kind of prisoner? Dad, please, sit down. Let me tell you what really happened. I sat on the folding chair next to her bed, trying to control my anger. Ted stood by the door, keeping watch. The concrete walls felt like they were closing in. 5 years ago, I got into trouble. Real trouble. I owed money to some dangerous people. Drug dealers from Detroit. I'd been using pills at first. Pain medication after Nancy was born, then stronger stuff when the prescription ran out. It spiraled fast. My stomach dropped. My daughter, addicted to drugs. How had I not seen the signs? I owed them $30,000. They said if I didn't pay, they'd hurt Nancy. Maybe worse. I was terrified. Richard said he had an idea. A way to make me disappear until things cooled down. The car accident. Richard knew someone at the funeral home. They used someone who died without family, someone nobody would miss. Made it look like it was me. Burned the car to destroy evidence. I came here to hide until the dealers moved on to other targets. For 5 years? It was supposed to be temporary. 6 months, maybe a year. But then Richard started getting money from you. He said it would help us maintain the deception, that we needed resources to keep me hidden safely. I looked around, the warehouse at the concrete floor, the makeshift living space, the photos of Nancy taped to the wall. Dorothy, do you know how much money I've been sending? Richard said a few thousand, enough to help with Nancy's expenses, $25,000 a year, for 5 years. Her face went pale. That's $125,000. Where did it go? She was crying harder now. Dad, I think Richard's been lying to both of us. Ted's voice came sharp from the door. Harold, we need to go. Someone's coming. We heard a car outside, doors slamming, Richard's voice and another voice. Barbara. Dad, you can't let them know you found me. Please. If they think I talked to you... I kissed Dorothy's forehead, the same way I used to when she was Nancy's age. I'm getting you out of here. I promise. Ted and I slipped out through a back exit just as Richard and Barbara came through the front. We made it to Ted's car without being seen, but my heart was pounding like a machine running too hot. Harold, we call the police now? Not yet. First, we get evidence. Real evidence. The kind that'll put them away for good and get my daughter free. I'd found Dorothy alive, but she was still a prisoner. And I was going to need every engineering skill I'd learned in 30 years to build the case that would bring her home. Over the next week, Ted and I planned our approach like engineering a complex manufacturing process. Systematic, methodical, foolproof. We couldn't afford mistakes. I used my Ford contacts to get professional-grade GPS tracking equipment. Small device, magnetic mount, 30-day battery life. We attached it to Richard's truck while he was inside a Home Depot. Within hours, we had his complete daily pattern mapped out. Ted's investigation skills complemented my technical background perfectly. While I analyzed the financial trail using spreadsheet software I'd learned for production cost analysis, Ted documented Richard's meetings with Barbara, their trips to expensive restaurants, their weekend getaways to lakefront, hotels. The money trail was damning. Richard had opened 3 separate accounts over 5 years. My $125,000 had been systematically diverted into investments, luxury purchases, and a growing offshore account in the Cayman Islands. Meanwhile, Dorothy survived on instant coffee and canned soup in a concrete prison. But we needed them to confess. On tape. In a way that would hold up in court. I called Detective Victor Thompson at the county sheriff's office. Ted had worked with Thompson for years before retiring. Solid cop, specializing in financial crimes. Mr. Mitchell, what you're describing is kidnapping, fraud, identity theft, and conspiracy. But we need evidence that'll convince a jury. What do you need? A confession, clear audio, no ambiguity, admissible in court. Thompson provided us with professional recording equipment, wireless microphone, digital recorder, real-time transmission to his team, the same technology they use for undercover drug stings. The plan was engineered like a Ford assembly line, every step calculated, every contingency planned. I'd confront Richard and Barbara directly, tell them I knew about Dorothy, about the money, about everything. Act like a desperate father who just wanted his family back. Ted and Thompson's team would monitor every word. The moment Richard confessed to the deception, they'd move in with warrant and arrest authority. Thursday evening, I called Richard. Richard, we need to talk about the money, about Dorothy, about everything. Long pause. Harold, I don't know what you mean. Meet me at the warehouse tomorrow night, 8 p.m., Industrial District, Building 447. Bring Barbara. Harold, I think you're confused. Maybe the stress is getting to you. 8 p.m., Richard, we end this tomorrow. Friday evening, I drove to the warehouse with recording equipment hidden under my shirt. Ted and Thompson's team positioned themselves outside with full surveillance setup. Dorothy didn't know what was happening. We'd decided it was safer if she seemed genuinely surprised. Richard arrived at 8:15 with Barbara. They looked nervous, but not panicked. They still thought they could manipulate the situation. "Harold," Richard said as they entered the warehouse. "I'm worried about you. You seem confused lately." "I'm confused about where my $125,000 went." Richard glanced at Barbara. "That money went to Nancy's care. Education, clothes, medical expenses." "Really? Show me the receipts. I don't keep detailed records. It's all mixed in with household expenses." I walked over to Dorothy's corner, where she sat on her bed, looking scared. "Hello, Dorothy." Richard went white as automotive paint. Barbara took a step backward. "Harold," Richard started, "this isn't what it looks like." "What does it look like, Richard?" "My daughter, who I thought was dead, living in a warehouse while you collect my retirement money? She's here for her own protection. The people she owed money to are dangerous." "What people?" Richard looked at Barbara, calculating. "Drug dealers from Detroit. Dorothy owed them serious money." "How much money?" $30,000. I pulled out my phone, showed him my banking app with 5 years of transfers highlighted. $125,000, Richard. Over 5 years. That's $95,000 more than Dorothy's supposed debt. Richard's jaw tightened. There were other expenses, bribes, payoffs, keeping her hidden safely. "Show me the records." Barbara finally spoke. "Mr. Mitchell, you don't understand how complicated this situation has been. Explain it to me." Richard looked around the warehouse, still trying to find an angle. "The money kept her alive, Harold. Kept her safe from people who would have killed her. In a warehouse? For 5 years? It was supposed to be temporary. I pulled out photocopies Ted had helped me gather, bank statements showing offshore transfers, luxury purchases, hotel receipts. Cayman Islands vacation, Richard? Or are you planning permanent relocation?" Dead silence. The recording equipment was capturing everything. Richard's face changed completely. The pretense dropped like a failed gear system. "You don't know what you're dealing with. Enlighten me." Barbara stepped forward, no longer playing the concerned girlfriend. "Your daughter was a drug addict, Mr. Mitchell. She was going to destroy herself, and probably Nancy too. So you decided to help by stealing my money." "We saved her life," Richard said coldly. "And we've been supporting Nancy properly for 5 years, while living off my retirement savings." Richard shrugged. "You could afford it. Comfortable Ford pension, paid-off house. You didn't need the money as much as we did. What about the drug dealers you were so afraid of?" Barbara actually laughed. "There were no drug dealers. Dorothy owed money to me. A personal loan that went bad. When she couldn't pay, Richard suggested this elegant solution. You faked her death over a personal loan? It seemed cleaner than messy legal proceedings, divorce, custody battles, asset division. This way, everyone got what they needed. The recording device was getting everything. Outside, Thompson's team was documenting every confession. "So, you've been keeping my daughter prisoner for 5 years, stealing my money, lying to Nancy about her mother being dead." Richard's face hardened completely. Dorothy agreed to this arrangement. She wanted out of her responsibilities. "Is that true?" I asked Dorothy. She looked at Richard with 5 years of accumulated fear, then at me. "Dad, I never agreed to stay this long. It was supposed to be 6 months while the loan situation got resolved." "She's lying," Barbara said dismissively. Dorothy was happy to disappear from her problems. Happy to live in a concrete box? Richard stepped closer, his voice dropping to a threatening whisper. "Harold, you need to walk away from this. Forget what you've seen. Dorothy's better off here than she would be anywhere else. And if I don't forget?" Richard's eyes went cold as machine steel. "Then you might have another family tragedy to deal with." That threat was exactly what Detective Thompson needed to hear. The warehouse doors crashed open. "Police! Hands up!" Thompson's team moved with military precision. Richard and Barbara were cuffed and reading their rights within 30 seconds. "Richard Coleman, Barbara Reynolds, you're under arrest for kidnapping, fraud, conspiracy to commit theft, and making terrorist threats." Richard looked at me with pure hatred as they led him away. "You have no idea what you've done. I got my daughter back." The trial was 4 months later. federal courthouse, because the fraud crossed state lines. Richard got 12 years in federal prison. Barbara got 8 years. Both were ordered to pay full restitution. Dorothy moved into a small apartment near my house. Nancy lives with me now, but Dorothy sees her every day. They're rebuilding their relationship carefully, with professional help. Some evenings, we all have dinner together at my kitchen table. Dorothy helps Nancy with homework. I tell them stories about Margaret, about how proud she'd be to see our family healing. Margaret never got to see Dorothy come home, but I talk to her picture every night, tell her our girl is safe now. Sometimes I think I can feel her smiling. To any father listening to this story, trust your instincts. When something doesn't add up, investigate. Don't let grief blind you to manipulation. Use whatever skills you have, engineering, accounting, whatever, to protect your family. The truth always surfaces eventually. Sometimes it just needs the right person asking the right questions, using the right tools. My daughter Dorothy is alive. My granddaughter Nancy is safe. My retirement savings are mostly recovered. Most importantly, Margaret's memory can rest in peace now. Our family is whole again. Sometimes the people we trust most are the ones we should watch most carefully, not because we don't love them, but because love can make us blind to the warning signs that our engineering minds would never miss in a professional setting. The best revenge isn't getting even. It's using your brain, your skills, and the law to make sure justice is served while keeping your family safe and your conscience clear.